The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world today. We're up to topic number 4, the fourth and final installment of our discussion and comparison between Scrum and Lean. And yes, I know we originally probably talked about it sedately as a comparison, but we put a bit of showmanship and drama into it, and I've called it a showdown. Which is probably not true, because as we're going to talk about over the next hour or so, it's really not that at all, and that's kind of the secret through all of this. And hopefully those of you who've already had a chance to have a read and have a listen to, rather, the pre-recorded stuff, you will have already cottoned on to that fact that we're really looking for what is the real question here, not really making a direct comparison. So that's what we're going to have a chat about tonight. We're going to look at really the two sides of the equation. We're going to look at all the different things that we might need to think about, how we're going to answer these sorts of questions, how we're going to go over this sort of stuff. So we're also going to have a chance for questions as we go. So we're through all of this. Let me just put this, close the poll and put up our details. The questions. We've gone through and done a check. We're pretty confident that through, at some point in some way with everything we've delivered, we've been able to answer all the questions that have come up to date. But if anyone has any questions that they feel they'd like us to elaborate on, or they want to discuss a bit further or go into more detail or anything, please put it up there today. We are going to try and allow a bit more time for questions at the end this evening, so hopefully everyone will get their opportunity in there. So make sure that you do put your question up if you haven't had an answer to date, and we'll cover it that way. So, including admin questions. Now we'll go through the housekeeping bits first. We'll go through it a little bit more quickly this time because you're all veterans at this stuff now, so you know all this sort of stuff. You know about the questions box. That's the place where you put all your questions. That's where you look at everyone else's questions. That's where you see all the questions that James has answered by text. He'll be putting answers in there, so check there. And we'll also be shortlisting questions that we're going to cover at different points throughout the night, especially at the end. So please use that. Now, you all would know all about the course portal. Of course, you'll be checking all the details there, I'm sure. Just a reminder about that. Forums, there's been some great discussions on the forums, a few different things, and a few terrific contributions from people, which is great to see. There's another question's popped up there today, I think. So have a look at that. Just make sure before you sign off and finish off that there's nothing in there that you feel you want to contribute to or comment on. And, of course, we know about the webinar recordings. All these get recorded, and it'll be up and running. The study guides, you know that all that. That's all part of the background information on a per-topic basis, and pre-recorded lectures that are in there. I'm hoping that you've all had a chance to listen to that sort of stuff and get a hold of it. If you haven't listened to it all yet, just make sure you've at least downloaded it so you've got access to all that sort of stuff. And there's the address, but as I said, you probably all are familiar with all that and know how that stuff works, so we won't go into too much detail about that tonight. Now, it appears that we do have some questions about the test. Let me jump on that now and give you some information about what's going to go on with the test. The test is going to be available roughly this time next week. So you've got a week to think about it. You've got a week to download, listen to, study, whatever you want to do to get prepared. When the test goes live, it'll be accessed via the portal. You'll be able to get access to it down the bottom underneath topic 4. There'll be the link underneath that for the portal for the test access. It will be timed, so there'll be a time limit. It'll be something in the order of an hour. Details of that will be spelled out on the test instructions. But once that timer begins, it won't stop. You can't pause it. So once you start that, make sure that you've got that time available to complete it, because any questions unanswered by the end of that timer won't get any marks. Now, it's all multiple choice. You have an entire week in which to sit this test. So it will be available and live for 7 days. You can choose which of those 7 days or which hour in those 7 days you want to sit that test, but you only get one chance. You only get to sit it once. Now, that's during what we call the assessment period for the first week. Only tests that are submitted and performed during that week are eligible for the certificate of completion. And you won't be getting any answers or feedback or marks or results until after the assessment period has closed. So basically, we're not going to give any answers until the opportunity to pass has closed. Then we'll give everyone the answers. And then after that, after the first week, you will be able to resit the test as many times as you like and you'll be able to get your results and answers and feedback and continue to improve your result. You see exactly what the answer should have been. But you won't get that in the first week. But anyone who doesn't do the test in the first week, unfortunately, won't be eligible for the certificate of completion. You have to have sat it in that week, and you have to have passed, which is 50% or more. And as I said, only multiple choice style of questions. You won't have to type anything. You won't have to type short answers of any kind. So hopefully that's going to give you enough information about what's going on. There'll be more information about exactly how many minutes and exactly how many questions will be visible in the details and instructions of the test when it's available in the next few days. So a week from now, Thursday evening next week, it'll be available. So are there any, before we kick off and have a talk tonight, are there any other questions, admin questions, background questions? Throw them up now. Chris is just asking what's the pass mark is 50% for the assessment. How many questions are there in the test? You've got me stumped on that one. I'm not exactly sure the total number of questions. James might be remember. James, do you remember exactly how many questions we had last time?
I think 40 questions, essentially 10 questions per week or study area, but I guess it also depends on what we finalise on, whatever suits it best and fits the hour.
I think we're going to do the same thing. So I think it'll be the same. It'll be the same format, which means it'll be 40 questions in 60 minutes. But they're only tick the box kind of questions, nothing to type. So that's hopefully that answers your questions about what to expect with all that with regards to the test. And yes, all multiple choice. 4 choices for each question. So we're not going to be sneaky and give you a dozen choices per question. It's just 4. All right, so tonight we are going to try and get our heads straight on what the answer to this question is, Scrum or Lean. And to do that, we're going to completely unravel the question and figure out how we're going to ask the question and ask a completely different question. So first of all, the whole issue of comparing these two things is, in one sense, quite false. It's a bit artificial. So I've thrown this as a starting point by saying, well, what's the definition of something to compare? And to compare is to, as it says here, estimate, measure, compare the similarity or dissimilarity between. So to consider or describe as similar, equal, or analogous, or to liken it to something. Now, if we use these kinds of definitions and we ask ourselves, can we compare Lean with Scrum? Can we liken Lean to Scrum, given what we've learned about it already? Can we consider them to be similar to each other or dissimilar to each other? Can we define their similarities or define their dissimilarities? And if we can, how easy or how hard is that? And if it's hard, then is a comparison the right approach? Or in trying to find a comparison between these two things, are we perhaps unlocking the real issue of, are we asking the right question? And in order for us to answer the question of what is more appropriate for our situation or for us, is Lean or Scrum going to be better, then we have to have asked and answered a whole list of other questions that go so much deeper into everything that's going on within our situation, our organization, our team, etc. And that's really been the point for us with this course over the last 4 weeks, is to try and look at all of the different questions that need to go into this process to support any kind of decision as to what approach and answer there might be to your version of Agile. So we're not even comparing apples with apples because, apples and oranges, even apples, they're fruit, right? They're round, they're small, they'll grow on trees. There's lots of things that are similar. So, it's a bit like saying if we're trying to compare Lean and Scrum, are we trying to compare apples with chocolate donuts? And I put chocolate donuts in there because I like chocolate donuts. Does this one have a favorite? No, I like apples too. Now, it'll kind of sound a little bit silly, but the point is we're trying to get to the fundamental question. And when we start looking for the real question, we kind of discover that there's actually more than one. There's a handful of real questions, and that is what we're going to try and cover tonight. what are the most significant questions that we need to delve into, and how do we want to deal and handle those questions in order to satisfy ourselves that whatever version of Agile we've adopted and embraced is going to be the most appropriate for us in our situation. So to find out what is the real question, we're really talking about a process of self-analysis. It's not about analyzing the methodologies. It's not about analyzing the different ways that Agile is done. It's about analyzing ourselves. It's the inward questions that matter the most. It's the inward analysis. It's about saying, well, how Agile are we? And how do we do Agile in these areas? And if we are Agile, how are we Agile? And if we're not Agile, how are we not Agile? So it's the introspection that is the most valuable element of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Because once we've got this granular and comparative understanding of how far or close our current scenario is from any of these Agile principles that we've considered and want to embrace, then we'll know where we need to improve upon it and where we need to go. And the areas that show us that we are closer to Agile already in our thinking will tell us whether or not we can move towards something like a Scrum methodology, or whether we can move towards something like a lean framework, or something in between is going to be more appropriate. And of course, the two pillars of our introspection that we need to think about, which we'll go into detail as we go through this evening, is our situation and our objectives. It always comes down to this. But these are simple words that are meant to describe actually vastly complex issues. I mean, situation as a word covers so much. It covers so much of what we are, what's going on, the situation. What's the situation with our company? What's the situation with our organization? Well, have you got a few hours? I can answer the question. So we know that there's enormous complexities, and the objective tonight is to try and drill down on some very key specific things that are going to have the biggest impact on our decisions and our answers, and focus on working out how, because then when you're faced with that challenge in your own workplace, you can get the right people together in the right kind of workshops, facilitate the right kind of discussions, and get the right kind of outcomes out of it. Because there's no way in a typical organization that you can exhaustively analyze every aspect of the situation. You just have to find the important hot buttons and turn those buttons. And ultimately, all we're trying to find out at the end of the day is, what do we really need? And it's that fundamental decision. What do we do next? You know, what's our course of action? What needs to happen? Now, I'm starting off with a quote from William Blake. Now, I think we've quoted William before. He's an English poet around the turn of the 18th century, an author, quite prolific in his time with his writings. His statement here, he said, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's," as in another man's system. "I will not reason and compare. My business is to create." The message out of this that we want to apply is to say that it's not simply a case of choosing someone else's system off the shelf and putting it on like a coat that doesn't fit. And as much as we might be tempted to make comparisons and say, well, look, you know, this situation and our situation, this model out that model, this method, that method, the real result is the process of creation. And even in as much as we think we're going to just embrace Scrum, we think, yeah, look, Scrum out of the box, that'll work for us. Let's just do that. Well, you know what? 3, 6, 12 months later, it won't be what you do out of the box anymore. Maybe even next week, it won't be out of the box anymore. How many times have we been in a situation where a company has turned around and said, look, you know, we want to buy a bit of software. No, we don't need to invent our own. That costs too much money. Let's just buy something off the shelf. That'll work for us, right? And then sometimes later it's, oh, can we customize this a little bit? Can we customize this? Can we change this? What if we did this a little bit different? Let's write a customized script for this. All right, we're familiar with that. We know how that works. We know that that's the paradigm. So let's begin this process with our eyes open and a clear, not only an awareness of that problem, but let's not make it a problem. Let's make it something we're going to leverage. Let's make it an advantage to us, because we're going to embark on a process of deciding which way to go that's going to leverage the fact that we're going to constantly improve it. We're going to create our own. So there's no such thing as out of the box, there's no such thing as off the shelf, there's no such thing as like someone else did it. Those are just ideas. And they're ideas that we're going to take into account and develop and evolve for ourselves. Now, if we're going to build ourselves something that just works for us, we're going to need it to be comprehensive. We can't really go into a system and say, well, if we're going to not be enslaved by another man's system, we're going to create our own. Well, it needs to be a system that does and touches on all the things we need. So we need it to work for us at 3 layers of effectiveness. We've kind of touched on this already, and for those of you who've been through the pre-recorded audio, you'll know that we've already talked a little bit about this here. But we're talking about the difference between a philosophy, a framework, and a methodology. So, big words, many syllables, what do they really mean? And they are words that are often thrown about as jargon in business management. And so they get misinterpreted, reinterpreted, reused, misused, etc. We're going to talk about them as they mean to us in this context. So firstly, what do we mean by a philosophy? And we're talking about a business philosophy. We're talking about a philosophy that is a way of thinking about something. It doesn't tell us what to do about it. It tells us how to think about it. What do we mean by thinking? Well, we mean thinking as in introspection. And what's introspection? It is judgment. So a philosophy is an attitude that will guide our behavior. It's our introspection that says we generally behave like this. We will generally behave like this. And when we think about agile philosophy, we say, well, we are going to behave in an agile manner. That means we're going to behave in an adaptive manner. We're going to behave in a flexible manner. We're going to behave in a collaborative manner. And there's a variety of hallmarks of the agile concept that we can apply to this, apply to our behavior, apply to our attitudes, apply to our way of thinking. And this is why sometimes we talk about agile thinking rather than agile methodology. So the answers to the introspection, they become our guiding principles. So philosophy is about question and answer, but it's all the internal question and answer. We ask the question, how do we normally go about this? What are our guiding principles? And we come to conclusions about our guiding principles. And those conclusions become the boundaries of our judgment. So we talk about them as boundaries of judgment because when we make a judgment about our attitude or our thinking, and we make a decision about that thinking, we set the parameters within which we won't step outside of those. So if we say that we want to be agile in our philosophy, we want to be adaptable. Let's choose something a little bit more granular. We want to be adaptable. We want to be able to adapt. So this means that the boundaries of our judgment mean that we're going to be more harsh, more critical, less accepting of things that limit our ability to be adaptive, limit our ability to be flexible. So philosophy is how we think. It's how we conceptualize. It's the concept behind it. And a concept can be applied to many different things. And this is why when we talk about agile, we can have agile management practice just as easily as we can have agile project management, just as easily as we can have agile grocery shopping. Don't laugh. We do agile grocery shopping. We've been there, right? I have. You go to the shops and you have your list with you, and you pick out exactly what's on the list, and that's all you do, right? You don't pick up anything else. You just buy what's on the list, and then you rush to the checkout. So you miss out on the opportunity to walk past the coffee and sugar aisle and to be prompted and remember the fact that actually you're almost out of coffee. Maybe you should get some coffee because you feel like some coffee tonight. So the agile shopping is the part of being adaptable. It's like I'm going to walk down every aisle with my list, and I'm also going to add things that I suddenly realize are going to be useful for my end result, which is to enjoy my evening. So if that's a philosophy, what's a framework? Well, we call a framework a way of deciding. So philosophy gives us questions and thinking and judgments, but a decision is what something we call a supporting structure. A framework is used to create something. A framework is a set of decisions or a process of making those decisions. So it's It's a way of taking a philosophy and applying it to a situation. So if we say, well, we want to be flexible, does that mean I want to be able to do the splits like a gymnast? No. No, that means I want to be able to change what I'm doing in a business context. And how do we know which kind of flexible we're talking about? That's what the framework is meant to do. How do we define flexibility? How do we define adaptability? How do we define teamwork? It's the framework that is our supporting structure that allows us to have decisions about those defining characteristics. So we use a framework as a source of alignment. It's also really a tool for alignment. It is a supporting set of principles that are in context with what we are trying to do. And we can only use it to create alignment when we have it aligned with the context of what we're trying to accomplish. So in terms of project management, the framework is going to be aligned with the principles of achieving a project. It's going to be aligned with the challenges of having to get something changed or having to get something achieved in an organization. The principles such as having a finite start and finish point, principles such as having finite resources, principles such as being outside of the business as usual. These are all fundamental principles of what any project is, regardless of your methodology. So your framework needs to work within those principles. It needs to support those principles and those ideas. So in that sense, you could say project management is a philosophy of let's get something done that's outside of the normal process. But we need a framework that relates to those principles and philosophies. So if we have a philosophy in mind, we have a framework that allows us to contextualize that philosophy into our particular situation, what are we going to do about it? Well, there we need a methodology. So a methodology becomes a way of doing it. It's a way of acting or action, where outcomes actually take place, results are achieved. So a methodology becomes our guide for expending our effort, for investing our effort. And effort is doing. So when we expend effort, we work, as it were, then outcomes result from that work. We need a guide that helps us make sure that each and every decision we make of what effort and work we invest is going to work towards the objective that we've all aligned as part of our framework. So methodologies do tend to be a little bit more instructional in nature. They can tend to be a bit more definitive because they're helping us make decisions about what we're going to do rather than just how we're going to think. And the reason we as humans in a modern business environment, the reason why methodologies exist generally is because we want to increase the predictability of that investment, because every investment has an opportunity cost. Now we know what the opportunity cost is. It's the other thing that we could do with our time and effort if we didn't do this, but we've chosen to do this. So immediately the opportunity cost is all the other things we've decided not to do with that time and effort. So hence there is a risk that have we made the right decision? Have we invested in the right thing? And the way in which we want to make sure that we've achieved the goals is by having a methodology that helps us decide the actions we need to take and the specific investment of that effort to yield the outcome that we're looking for. What outcome? The outcome that was defined out of the framework, the source of alignment that we use that got everyone on the same page and everyone in the same picture that says, we're going to build Rome. Perhaps not in a day. It might take us a bit longer. But we're going to build Rome. And we've got a framework for that, and now we need a methodology. Anyone got any questions up front? Any thoughts? Any comments? Let's pause for a moment. We might not have any questions yet. We've only sort of just got into things. Let me just check with James just to see if we do have any questions we can tackle. James, have we got anything here?
Hi, Brenton. No content questions at the moment. So if anyone's got any questions about the content and Scrum Verslean as it is, put them up and Brenton will answer them. There's one more question about the exam, which we'll just save till the end so we can really focus on that then, if that's all right.
All right. Okay. So, all right, no questions yet. Let's barrel on. Obviously, everyone is thoroughly tuned into what's going on, which is great. All right. So, let's talk a bit more about frameworks. I mean, philosophy is not really that useful to the question we're dealing with in tonight's webinar. So, let's talk about why and how frameworks do their job in a little bit more detail. So, we talk about framework as being supportive of context. Now, what's the point of context? Why do we worry about context? Context is understanding. So it comes from the way in which we think about things. The framework is the way that we change our thinking. And the question about a framework is a framework what we need in our company or in our organization? Well, the first question is, do we need to change the way we think? Now, is a philosophy enough to change the way we think in our company? Generally, no. You're not going to be as successful if you put 50 people in a room and say, look, let me tell you this philosophy about being flexible. They're not going to have enough context to how these principles apply in their daily life and environment. The framework is what brings that into their world. So we talk about being flexible and adaptable in the context of their actual work and company and environment and situation. But we only do that, or we only really want to do that, if one of our key goals is to change the way they're thinking. If we want them to embrace a principle, and they're currently not embracing it very much or very well, and we want that or need that, then maybe starting with a framework is going to be more effective rather than bringing in the shock value of saying, right, we're going to go straight to a methodology and we're going to tell you how your world is going to be different tomorrow. But if we first really need them to understand the thinking behind it, then a framework for context is going to be an important ingredient. Keep in mind that throughout this discussion tonight, I'm not going to tell you that you don't need one or the other or both. It's about how much of each do you need. So the point of getting the same answers, if you want to change people's thinking, you can't tell them how to think. It just doesn't work. We know that. We've experienced that. People have tried to tell us how to think since we were thinking. You know, since we were kids, people have been trying to tell us how to think. But we've always, through human nature, we make up our own minds. The way in which we actually get people to change the way we think is by first thinking about the same questions. It's the question. If you get everyone asking the same question, you've got a significantly higher chance of them thinking about the same kind of answer. But if you try and give them the answer before they've all thought about the question in the same way, you're going to have a much more disparate response and perhaps negative response to the answer that you're trying to give. This is the whole principle of saying you don't tell people what to do. You ask them in such a way that they come to the conclusion of what they need to do. A lot more difficult, of course. But this is the point that we're making, that this is what frameworks do. And we talked in the pre-recorded and we talked in week 2 about lean. Lean is about the questions. So what this lets us do is take on board the agile thinking in a slightly more gentle way, because we're not steamrolling in with a methodology that says, right, now today is going to be the Scrum planning day. You're all going to do this and you're going to do it this way and you're going to love it. And then for the next 2 weeks, you're going to be doing this, and then we're going to do it this, and then this is going to happen, and this person is going to do this job, etc. If you need a more gentle acclimatization to the thinking of the philosophy, then a framework is going to be the way in which you achieve that. You're not going to be as successful if you just come in, even though how convinced you are that the methodology is what you need. The framework might be your entry point for that. Because ultimately, like any project, and we've talked about projects before, they are all about the decisions. The whole point about having anything to do with a project is about making the right decisions from start to finish. And anything to do with the changes of how we do projects, such as whether we adopt any agile thinking, again, it's all about the decisions. And it's about how we make those decisions in the realm of project delivery. So we've talked about agile project management being making decisions in a different timeline. We've talked about it philosophically as being, instead of plan-based, methodology where you make all the decisions up front, in Agile, we make a lot of the decisions much closer to the time in which they're relevant and poignant. So in the same way, the process of deciding how you are going to change your project management processes or ideas or thinking or philosophies, it's all about the decisions. How are you going to make decisions tomorrow compared to how you made them yesterday? And remember, frameworks are a way of deciding. This is where these types of change live in our organization. We change via a framework for change because it helps us make the decision about how we're going to decide. And the only way we can do that collectively is with an aligned understanding. Companies are full of people. Organizations are full of people. Teams are people. So there is no escaping the fact that if you want any of these large macro scale changes to be successful in any organization, we need the people to understand, and we need them to have a similar understanding and aligned understanding. And the only way we can give them that and help them have that is through context. And context is best delivered via framework, because if you skip this, if we don't do this contextualized alignment of understanding the core principles, then people will be told to do something that they don't understand why they do it. And inevitably, we know what happens when you push people into a situation without giving them a full understanding of how and why they're doing it. They will find reasons to think, oh, well, that doesn't really matter quite so much. They don't see how and why something matters. It might be very important for the outcome of the methodology or for the outcome of the project. But if they don't see that, if they don't see the fact that they need to be on time to turn up for the daily Scrum and understand why that's the case, then they might not bother. What effect is that going to have on the team dynamics that they're a part of? What effect is that going to have on their success and their role in the Scrum environment, for example? So this stuff isn't new for us. We know all this sort of stuff. But the way in which good leaders, good managers, and, of course, the external business consultants that get pulled in to solve these sorts of things for many organizations, the way they go about this is through contextual alignment as a first point. This is the only way we get our buy-in. Now, Alan Kay is a very prominent computer scientist. He's been involved in a lot of great initiatives worldwide throughout the years. He's the chap that also came up with the phrase, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Perhaps a more well-known quote of his. He's also credited with saying that context is worth 80 IQ points, which is an awfully big percentage of our average IQ. And I'm inclined to agree with that. The ability for us to leverage our intelligence, to leverage our cleverness, and therefore to leverage our potential energy, our potential value, all of our ability to leverage our value is determined by our strength of contextual understanding. And when you go down the path of adopting any agile concept, we've already covered, and for those of you who've done the previous course, we would have done this extensively. You need to have a team of people who are all contextually aligned, because the whole idea of being adaptive in Agile and being able to flexibly adjust your journey through the process means that you have to have the clearest possible context and aligned understanding of what you're trying to do, because you're making decisions in the moment. You're making quick and fast decisions as the information becomes available. Those are only going to be good decisions if the people are all tuned into each other and their information. So just simply choosing to be agile means that you're choosing to be highly contextually aligned in your teams and between your teams. So in that sense, we really can't afford to underdo the whole concept of frameworks. So what's the methodology for? Well, for some people, in some situations, thinking too hard is a little bit scary. It's not what they like to do. We know that people exist in organizations that don't necessarily want to be involved in the big issues and the big questions. They don't want to invest their energy and time in understanding the philosophical groundwork of their organization and why we're making the decisions. Yes, those sorts of things happen. You also get people that want to simply throw their 2 cents worth in, but they don't want to take responsibility for the decisions of how we're going to run our world. So you have people that have different comfort levels with how much they're going to invest of themselves in the process of change. And at the bottom end of that spectrum will be those that are simply going to be the subject to the change. They still need acceptance of the change. So you can't turn around and say, well, look, these are a bunch of sheep, so we're just going to tell them what to do. Here's their model. They don't want to contribute to their method and how things are done, so we're just going to give them this and it'll succeed. Well, no. There still needs to be an adoption. There still needs to be a buy-in of that. A willing, proactive acceptance of the fact that this is how life is going to be now. We're going to have this methodology. This is how we're going to do things. So it's not a case of saying, well, we're just going to throw in a methodology because all these people are just happy to be told what to do. Because if that's how we apply a Agile methodology, like Scrum, then the Scrum will have a much higher chance of failure because it relies upon getting people out of that sheep mentality and getting them proactively contributing to the results sprint by sprint, etc. This process of throwing on or bolting on a methodology, that used to work in plan-based situations, in process-driven organizations, where it's simply a case of, well, how do you do this? Just look at the form, Look at the policy and procedure document. That'll tell you how to do it. Those situations are not Agile. We cannot apply that method, that paradigm of how to answer the question. So no, methodology is not about this. Methodology in Agile, you need it to be able to adapt and evolve. Any methodology is not static in an Agile environment. It's still very much free, it's evolving, it's adapting, it's growing, it's expanding, it's learning. Everything we do about our methodology, as in the way in which we do things, is a constantly changing and growing thing. And we need to be embracing that propensity for change in how we do things, as well as what we do. Remember, we talked about Scrum. We talked about the review, the sprint review. We look at the sprint review for 2 things. We look at what did we do during our sprint? How can we do it better? What do we need to do differently next time? And then we looked at how did we sprint? And can we do that a different way, a better way next time? An integral part of the methodology of Scrum is constant improvement. So we can't do that with a join the dots kind of approach to the principle of methodology. So in Agile, any methodology, whether it be Scrum or whether it be something else that's going to tell you how to do things, you still need to have a little bit of bravery and you still need to be sufficiently clever. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not saying, look, you can no longer have any dumb people working there. There are no dumb people in an Agile environment because everyone is required to use their own abilities to the maximum extent to contribute to the flexibility. So even those people that we might think are low contributors to the intellectual function of what's going on, more often than not, they are simply not contributing to the fullest extent of their potential because the method doesn't allow them to. It doesn't encourage them to. It doesn't reward them for it. So there is, in most organizations, a vast amount of people that are currently not proactively contributing to what gets done and how it gets done, simply because the methodology in place at the moment doesn't foster that. It's not because they can't. And Agile turns around and says, well, we believe that everyone can. And look, if there are a handful that can't, that will become apparent and the natural course of action will become obvious at some point. But we don't start with that assumption. And this is one of the things that comes up with a lot of people that I talk to about saying, oh yeah, but we've got a bunch of people in our organization, they're stuck in their ways, they're a bit lazy, they don't want to think too hard, and they're not terribly clever anyway. Well, that paradigm means that you're probably sunk even before you start, if you start with those assumptions. So we need to flip those assumptions around and say, well, no, what the methodology is going to do is bring the best out of these people. It's going to give them an opportunity to really contribute to what's going on in ways they never previously could. So there's no such thing as join the dots. It's not about that at all. It's not about this is how you do it. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. No. Scrum, a little bit like what we've talked about in Lean, Scrum is really guiding us on the questions we need to ask, but it's guiding us on far more granular questions, questions on a daily basis. Questions like, what did we get done today? What did we get done yesterday? What are we going to do today? And what are the challenges to getting that done? The daily Scrum stand-up. Remember that one? It's all questions. It doesn't tell you what the answers are. We've still got to paint our own picture. So, if this is the case, then how, if this is so complex, there's just so many different things involved, how are we ever going to make a decision about what our methodology should look like? Well, a Frenchman by the name of François-Marie Aurier, I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyone who knows the correct French pronunciation will know I'm not telling the truth, but François-Marie Aurier, French philosopher, lived around the 18th century, known as Voltaire. It became a bit of a writing name. It was a pen name, if you like. Voltaire was, I think, an anagram of a Latinized version of his surname. But his phrase here, he said, judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. And this is an undercurrent that's hopefully coming through all of this. The way in which you embark upon any journey of change to consider any agile idea at all will be determined and driven by the way in which you ask your questions and the way in which you get others to get involved with the questioning process. That will tell you far more about what course of action, what path you need to take. It'll tell you far more about how much Lean, how much framework you need, how much methodology, how much Scrum. You will get a much better idea of what that is based on the questions that people around you ask and the questions that they respond to and resonate with. Speaking of questions, let's see if we've got any. I'm just going to sort my other thing here and just see if I've got any questions to tackle and talk about here. So, Alan's asking the question, does this mean that an Agile champion works mostly with the framework? Let me take an assumption, Alan, on what you mean by an Agile champion. If we're talking about someone who is an advocate of Agile principles in an organization, perhaps a protagonist, someone who is either charged with the responsibility or takes on the responsibility of helping their organization become more agile in nature, if that's what we mean by that, then I would agree. They will work more with the framework than they will with the methodology. And if you look at the strict roles that are available in Scrum, there aren't many, remember? There's the Scrum Master, and then there's the Product Owner. Now, I guess it's an open question. Which of those two would be best suited to operate in as the Agile champion, to operate as the person living in the framework? In most cases, in my view, the answer would be the Product Owner. They are ultimately accountable for the success of what's going on here. And they might have a Scrum Master who's really getting involved in methodology, but it's the Product Owner who carries the can. And that degree, that weight of responsibility is going to be a weight that the Product Owner can use to influence others, a weight of influence that can be applied. So yes, I would agree that's very much the case. Robert's asking the question, adapt and evolve equals continue alignment and tuning of Agile? Question, yes, very much so. Adapt and evolve we're talking about in this context is to say, well, we're adapting and evolving constantly at two levels in any Agile principle. We're adapting and evolving what we're building, and we're adapting and evolving how we build it. And those two never separate. So we never sort of don't do one or the other. So adapt and evolve means that in a Scrum phenomenon, for example, every sprint, we're looking at what we've built, we're getting feedback from the client, have we delivered value, are we going to be delivering something different, are we going to improve on something, are we going to add something to it? All these decisions and changes get made sprint by sprint. And as we just talked about a moment ago, we change and evolve how we went about it. How, like, you know, should Fred be on this team and Mary be on that team? Or hang on, maybe Mary should be doing on this bit of work because that's perhaps more her expertise. Or maybe we should have our stand-up meetings over here. Maybe we should have, Tom, Dick, and Harry involved in our sprint review meetings next month because, they had lots to add and they weren't there. Whatever. It's how we go about it. We're changing all of that. All right, so we've already talked a bit about situation, and situation is a dauntingly huge concept, and I want to break it down and try and tackle it a little bit differently here, because I want to give you some thoughts to say, okay, if so much of what you're going to decide upon of how you're going to embrace anything Agile, if it's so driven by your situation, how are you going to start to analyze your situation? What are you going to need to think about? How are we going to do that? That's a big ask. We did touch on this in one of the pre-recorded, but we're going to go into it in a bit more detail here. So, first of all, there are many things that can be considered to be contributors to our situation, but we're going to break them down into 3 fundamental components, and we're going to use them as aggregates for everything that falls under them. So the components of our situation that we're going to categorize are the commercial components, the cultural ones, and then something that we call the inertia and momentum. So what are these components of our situation? Well, first of all, the commercial one is everything to do with value. It's every question and situation and answer to do with the assessment of value. So all of the commercial parameters are going to be things about cost, things about value, things about income and profit, everything about what we're doing in our organization, in our situation that makes it commercial in nature. Things like the fact that there is no inexhaustible supply of money. It's finite. There are decisions about how it gets spent. These are commercial aspects of our situation. How much money do we have, for example? How does it get spent? What is the process for spending it? These are all commercial things. Does this need to be profitable or not? So there are many aspects of our situation, and we put this at the front usually because this is what most people quickly gravitate to when they think about the situation, especially in a business context. But a lot of people tend to not go far beyond the commercial aspect of their situation. The next one along is the cultural aspect of our situation. Now, the cultural is all the human elements. These are all the things like, well, this is how we do things here. This is the habits of human behavior that are powerful forces at work in our particular situation. And examples of this are things like unionism. The prevalence of unionism and union behavior in certain industries is going to be a cultural phenomenon. The presence of pride. You're going to have national cultural business elements. Some nations, some places in the world have different business culture to others. They have different interpersonal culture than others. And the last point we talk about being inertia and momentum, these are basically the activities. What actually happens? What do we do? How much pressure do we have in how we do things? What is the momentum behind the activity we do? And what is the inertia? What is hard about it? What makes it difficult? So these are the aspects of our situation that directly relate to what happens. You can look at these 3 things another way. The commercial is generally the intellectual aspects of our situation. It just lives in the brain. This is the thought idea. So when we think about money, we generally, in a business context, think about it intellectually. When we talk about culture and people, it's the emotional element of our situation. It's how we feel about things. Usually, we either comply or react to cultural elements because of our emotional disposition towards it. And the inertia momentum, that's what we actually do, what actually happens. That's the motivational part of it. That's where we actually invest work or not. So if these are the 3 components of our situation, what influences those components? And what can be influences to change our situation or to assess it? Well, we've got 3 influences here that help us determine what is affecting our situation right now. And the first here is the people. So the people is the most significant because they affect pretty much everything else. The people around us, and we're talking about colleagues, team members, we're talking about those that are in direct connection to us, could be our bosses, those that our subordinates, those that work above and below us that we work directly with. There can be those people that work in other departments, but with whom we need to work with on a regular basis in the normal conduct of our duties. All of these people are going to be significant influences. Now, keeping in mind that people will influence the commercial situation, they'll influence the cultural situation, and they'll influence what goes on. So, for example, people might decide that being late is okay, where it usually previously wasn't. A manager or a person of influence might decide that being late is okay because they're always late themselves. So guess what? Their team start feeling being late as well. That's an influence on culture created by a person, just as an example. So what about organizational influences? Well, the organization are decisions that are made outside of the people that we interact with in the normal course of our work activity. So I've just mentioned all the people that we work with in the team and in the environment, etc. But there's going to be a level of decision making that is neutral and separated from any individual function in that organization, generally referred to as executive management. But we talk about it here as being the organization because it's not entirely true to say that it's just the decisions made by a handful of people like the board, because the influences upon them are organizational in nature. They will look at the reports and say, well, look, you know, share price is going down, we haven't made enough profit, our competitors are making more profit, we're losing market share. These things are going on in our organization. And therefore we're going to make some organizational decisions that are going to influence people's situation. The last one here is the environment, and that's the external things. That's the things outside of the organization that are going to be relevant. And really everything falls under this category. You can have political environment, political forces that are influencing our situation. You can have economic ones. The global financial crisis was a big one. All that sort of stuff still going on. You could even have mundane things like the weather influencing things. So the purpose of all this is to build a picture of all of the different things, but how we can condense them. We can ask the right questions to say, well, what are the various influences on our situation? And the reason we do this is to get as clear a picture as we can, but without it being too complex and too overcrowded, to understand what is our situation and what is it subjected to. So if this is all about our situation, the objective is kind of simple. The objective is merely a new situation. It's merely a new version of all this. And how do we get a new version of our situation? Well, it's the result of the influences. So if our situation is going to change, then we need to change the way in which these three things influence the three things above it. That's what Agile, or the embracing of Agile, is fundamentally all about. If you're going to turn around and say, well, we're going to go from plan-based to Scrum, this is what you're doing. You are using these three influences to influence these three components of a situation. And when you see the lines of effect and you can line them up and work them effectively and proactively, it can often be a lot easier to understand and at least not have the surprises of saying, well, we tried to do this and it fell over flat. Pardon me. It went horribly wrong. Why did it go horribly wrong? Well, why is it a surprise? Analyzing these vectors of influence and these components should give us the answer as to why that's the case. So achieving an objective is merely the process of change in order to bring that new objective into reality and make it our new current situation. And I'm not just talking about changing how we're doing things. I'm also talking about changing what we're doing. A project to create this fantastic product is a process of change to bring that new product into reality. So that's our objective. It can be the great thing at the end of the project that we're going to sell to the rest of the world. Don't forget your questions, folks. Keep them coming as we go through this, because we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So we've drilled into analysing and deciphering our situation somewhat to death, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about objectives as a corollary to that. If, as we just mentioned, objective is merely the new situation, then any objective is always going to be defined within the context of the current situation. So if our objective is, well, we want to be agile. Well, why do we want to be agile? Well, we want to be agile because it gives us these benefits. Well, it needs to be defined in the context of our current situation. Well, hang on, currently we're plan-based. Why do we want objectives to be highly adaptive when we're currently plan-based? How do we make that an objective in that context? Well, we need to change the context. So maybe we need a little bit of a framework to happen first. So let's talk about the framework of how to embrace and adopt agile principles in our thinking. And then we can open people's minds and ideas so they say, well, hang on, yeah, look, we could be a bit more efficient about this. We could be a little bit more lean about it. We could be a bit more adaptive about it. We could have some better flow and all that. That all sounds pretty good. And how are we going to do that? Well, there's this idea called Scrum that can kind of help with some of that. Maybe that's a worthwhile objective in the context of our situation. But humans are fickle beasts, and everything is subjective. You know, you're going to get people, you might have that kind of discussion, and it might go great with somebody, and with the next person it won't. And the highly subjective nature of how people identify with themselves comes out in all this. You talk about how people identify themselves. I mean, here's a quick test. You go and talk to someone and you say, you know, hi, I'm so-and-so, etc. What do you do? I'm a such and such. I'm an architect. Well, that's different from someone that says, well, I work as an architect. Subtle difference. What's the meaning behind it? One person is saying it because intellectually and emotionally they identify themselves with that label and with that title. Another person identifies themselves separately and identifies that as being simply what they're doing. And in any organization, you're going to find a bit of both, but you're going to find far more people that will identify with what they're doing. So when you start to say things like, well, we're going to adopt some agile principles and change the way we're doing things, you're changing how people identify with themselves. And we need to understand that, recognize that, be wary of that, and be careful as we go through that, because we need to help them not move away from their current identity. We need to help them embrace a new identity. And talking about helping them embrace a new identity means that we have to help them understand why they want to and why they should go about it. It's only going to work if we have buy-in. And of course, objectives, because of this, highly emotionally charged for a lot of people, and politically charged. I mean, we talk about it being politically charged. What I mean by that is that it's also emotionally charged. But we're talking about political being that there are in an organization, there are a handful of people with disproportionate influence. The managers. You know, the people of power and influence in the organization. Their emotional, subjective response to any objective is going to be disproportionately influencing on the situation. That's normal. That's just human business, right? Managers have more say than others who aren't managers or who don't have influence, however that influence comes about. Simply, that's where politics comes from, because people who are inclined to want to preserve their influence will want to make sure that it's not threatened. They will respond defensively to things that they feel might threaten their influence. And this is going to have a lot of consequence on how we might go about embracing any new paradigm. One of the first things that a lot of plan-based organizations struggle with is the fact that lots of people that have lots of flashy titles that were given to them to help them feel important in this bland and mundane process are suddenly going to get told to say, no, you're just a team member now. We've only got two people in charge, the product owner and the Scrum Master. The rest of you are all minions. And all those flashy titles that we gave you all to help make you feel better, we don't need them anymore. Well, why don't we need them? Well, because you're now able to contribute in a far more fundamental way to actually what we do and how we do it. So the initial reason to want to help people identify in a more positive way with what they're doing by giving them a flashy title has been replaced by saying we want them to identify with their role in contributing to a better world and a better project and a better outcome. Not saying it's easy, but that's what it's all about. So when you're trying to do this, you're trying to get people to think differently about all this, how they respond is going to be driven by their perception of what the consequences are. And obviously, when people are starting to think, should we be a little bit lean? Should we be a little bit something else? They're going to perceive what they think the consequences are going to be. Now, if you start with that, if you start with consequences, then reactions will begin before understanding begins. And then you've got a bit of a problem, maybe even a bit of a nightmare. So the sequence of evolution needs to be the consequences come last. The consequences need to be put aside and to be determined later after the decisions are made. So the only reason people focus on consequences generally is because they believe that the consequences are ordained. When people understand that they have a fundamental power of influence over the decisions that get made that will ultimately determine what consequences come about, people don't fear the consequences as much, and they are more able to participate in useful dialogue about how things need to change. How do we become more agile? How do we do a little bit of lean? How do we maybe consider using Scrum or something like it? Now, once again, like previously, we've saved this for this point until a bit later. It's, on the one hand, it's kind of obvious, but on the other hand, it's not, and it needs to be addressed. We are talking about an empirical paradigm. We are not talking about using Scrum to build a bridge. We are not talking about using Agile principles to do things that aren't or don't benefit from those Agile principles. We're talking about things that do benefit. We're talking about empirical objective. Now remember, what's the definition of empirical? It's where we learn by experience rather than by theory. So it's in situations where there is a good reason or good benefit from putting decisions further down the path and making decisions later and being able to adapt and evolve and be flexible. So it's those situations, it's the objectives where we say we're not sure exactly where these changes are going to finish up and exactly what it's going to look like. And this is empowering. I mean, this can be made a good thing, because when you turn around to an organization of people and you say, look, it's not empirical, you're not going to learn it as you go, we're not going to make it up as you go. We know, here it is. Word comes down from on high. This is how the world is going to look, and you're all going to love it. And now our job is to help make you accept it. That's the old-fashioned method. And it's disempowering, and it's what people fight against. If you can flip it around and say, well, look, we don't know what this is going to end up looking like. We don't exactly know how our project delivery processes will look at the end of all this. But we want you all to help us come to those conclusions and be a part of that journey and have a little bit of faith. We'll have faith in you that you'll be able to help contribute to build something, a process, an idea, a methodology, a concept that works, and you'll have a bit of faith in us that we will help facilitate that. But faith in what exactly? When you're talking about a team of people, a group of people, an organization of people, what are they having faith in when they're dealing with empirical projects? Well, there's three fundamental things. I've jumped ahead to my quote. I'll come back to the quote. Three elements of faith. They're going to have faith in the vision. And this works at two different levels, as always. You could be talking about a methodology vision, a vision of how we want to do things. They need to have faith in that vision. And that vision is defined by saying, well, we want to be flexible. We want to be sufficiently agile. We want to be able to respond to our customers' needs. We want to let them change their minds. We have a vision of how we want to do our projects. Or it could be we have a vision of a product. A vision of this product at the end that we believe in, we think it'll be a great product, but we don't know how to build it yet. But people need faith in the vision. They also need faith in the team, and that can mean faith in themselves and faith in each other. There needs to be enough faith that the people around them can adequately contribute to making this a reality. If they don't have faith in the team, then they're not going to believe that the vision can be real. The last thing they need is faith in the method. They need to be confident that there is an actual path to success. They need to be looking at these three things. They need to have faith that the vision is worthwhile, that the team can get them there, and that the method that they will follow will get them there. This is all about three different definitions of reality. Will it be real? We've got to tick these three boxes. So we need to be able to articulate what the vision is that we're trying to move everything to. We need to make sure that we are confident and empowering the team to get there. And we need to be confident that we're going to have the right method to do it. Now, our quote, who's Peter Drucker? He is an Austrian-born American and very prominent business thinker, and was for decades was a major contributing factor in a lot of the early concepts of corporation. He invented the idea, or not invented, he first espoused the idea of management by objectives. He wrote dozens of books about everything to do with business thinking of various kinds, and he was credited with being the person who originally came up with the concept of management by objectives. And he said once that management by objectives works if you know the objectives, and 90% of the time you don't. So he's actually saying that his own theories only work 10% of the time, because 90% of the time people don't know their objectives. How does this work in this situation? What does this mean to us? Well, this means that when you don't know what the objectives need to be and you've got to work it out as you go, you've got an empirical set of objectives, you've got an empirical problem, you need Agile. Agile, therefore, works 90% of the time. Okay, maybe I'm drawing a long bow there, but that's what I take as a possible answer to this paradigm. Perhaps if 90% of the time we're not sufficiently clear on the objectives, then maybe 90% of the time we need to be a little bit agile. At least a little bit. Now, before we have our next little bit of a chat, we're going to have a chat just about when do we favour Lean, when do we favour Scrum. It'll be a couple of quick slides. Before we do that, just see if there's any urgent questions right now that we can tackle, and then we'll go on and have a bit of a chat about those two bullet points. Got a question here from Robert asking, what's your best practice? How can we eliminate this kind of emotionally attached situations? The simplest answer I could give you is not a good one, is to say that you can't eliminate them, and you can't even, in most cases, you can't even belittle them or reduce them. What you would normally be encouraged to do is to work with them. So emotional attachment is a function of human nature, and to begin with the assumption that we can somehow rearrange human nature, change human nature, eliminate human nature, is kind of counter to the whole idea that we're trying to achieve here. What we're trying to do is work with it. So there's a couple of forces that we can apply, there's a couple of influences we can apply. Firstly, the cultural aspect. The people can and will have their behavior moderated by the behavior of others around them. So the power of the group can be very effective at changing emotional attachment. You're not going to make people care less about something quite as easily, but you can make them care about something different. The point here is to use the emotional attachment and attach it to something different. And the emotional movement of the crowd, of the group, is often a very potent tool in order to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is try and think about it. What are you actually trying to achieve? Can you maybe change what you're trying to do in tackling this problem of emotional attachment, reattach it to something else, and how can you do that? A lot of it is a combination of buy-in and alignment. If you can get a few people get buy-in and get their help to help others see the value of buying into something and reassign this emotional attachment, that would be the ideal outcome. And I'm hoping that somewhat answers your question on any of that. Let me know if we can elaborate further. We've got a little off-topic question here that we'll grab before we talk about Scrum, because we are going to talk about Scrum in just a moment. What's the smallest effective team size for Scrum? I mean, we're talking about how to get people to think differently about this. The question here from Kevin is practical circumstances to have one product owner, one Scrum Master, one developer. It's a 3-person team. Can a developer role be filled by a Scrum Master at the same time and still be effective? Well, if you've got a 3-person team, then yeah, it can. There's nothing that says you can't double up on roles. And if you have 3 people and those 3 people are wanting and should work in a Scrum-based format because it's the best way for them to be agile about what they're trying to do, well, that doesn't change the fact that having 3 people doesn't change the fact that you need to be agile. Not at all. So how you handle those roles, I mean, obviously it can get a bit more complicated, people wearing different hats and doing things differently. But yes, you can still do that. You just need to be prepared for the challenges that comes out of that. But I guess the better question is, can you still and should you still do Scrum or something like it with 3 people? Absolutely. Your version of it might be somewhat different to what you'll find in a book. Hopefully that answers or helps to answer your question, Kevin. So let's talk a bit more about Scrum. When do we favour Scrum? Why do we favour Scrum? Here's a few quick things to think about and when and why we might favour Scrum. If we are aligned on the need to be agile, if the team and the people are kind of okay with the fact that, yeah, we're aligned on this, we need to be agile, we've got reasons to be agile, the stuff we're doing needs us to be agile, we might favour the methodology approach of Scrum. If we have the buy-in that what we're doing is highly empirical, which kind of echoes off point 1, right? We need to be agile because what we're doing is highly empirical. We've got to figure this out as we go along. There is no better way to do it than that. And we get buy-in for that. People say, okay, well, we are going to have to make some decisions later, aren't we? How are we going to make decisions later? I'm so used to making them all now. Well, with this, we could do a Scrum thing. That really helps us make our decisions later and helps us make them well. All right, maybe we should Scrum. We should Scrum maybe if the team is ready to be accountable. Yeah, okay, we're a team and we're all going to be accountable and we're all going to work together and we're all going to contribute and we're all going to be proactive and we're all going to work towards improving what we're doing and improving how we're doing it, and we're going to be accountable for that. Then maybe we're ready to jump into the methodology end of the pool. When we're ready to accept that change is part of what we're doing. We're not just building a widget. We're changing how we build a widget. We're going to build a widget differently next month to how we built it last month. We're going to be up for that. We accept that what we're doing is accepting change as part of our life's journey. And that adapting to things, not mitigating things, but adapting for them is an accepted part of the process. So, for example, at the end of a sprint, client comes back and says, yeah, look, yeah, I kind of like that, but I've actually realized I want it now something different. We can adapt. We can do that. It's an accepted part of the process. It's not the case of saying, oh my God, they've changed their mind. What are we going to do? If the acceptance is there for the need to adapt, maybe we should. So trying to sum this up horribly in a single statement was extremely difficult. And this isn't going to answer the question, but here it is. Maybe use Scrum when we have a willing team who understand that there is more risk in other methods than there is in ultimately being adaptable. When the team says, look, it's riskier for us to do it another way, we are better off having an adaptable method. What adaptable method should we use? We're willing to do it. Here's one I prepared earlier. It's called Scrum, or something like it. Right? This is when you might favor Scrum. When might we favor Lean? Now remember, from everything we've said, this is also a question of when might we favor a methodology-based approach, and when might we favor a framework-based approach. Same question. Okay. We might favor Lean when we really need to ask more of the right kind of questions first, when we need to focus on unlocking people's minds, unlocking their awareness of what could be done, when they're not quite ready for a lot of these things. We need to get through the questions more and get alignment on the questions. Maybe we need to favor a framework like Lean. When we need to get underway quickly, when we need to hit the ground running, when we need to be getting some quick wins of improvement, but we don't really have the time or the opportunity or the luxury of either completely changing our method and implementing something different and dealing with all of the pushback that's going to come from that. If we can't wait for all that, we've got to get some quick results and some quick improvements. Maybe we're losing market share, or some competitors are already ahead of us and they're halfway through their testing phase and we need to get cracking. Maybe using a framework-based approach is going to get us underway a little bit quicker. Or when the team is a little bit less certain about exactly how to go about this. where the team says, well, look, yeah, we kind of need some decisions, but we need more decisions now, and we're not too sure about how we're going to do all this, then maybe a framework-based approach like Lean, like let's say, all right, let's just take away our wastage. We can all agree on that, right? We can be certain about the fact that we don't want to waste stuff. Yeah, okay, that's easier to adopt, easier to embrace. What about when we want to improve things more than we want to change them? And this could be because we've got an established scenario where we know that change is exceptionally difficult in our organization for our people. Improvement is change. That's the rub. That's the trick. Don't tell them that. But once they've got used to improving, many, many people will get a little bit of a hunger for it. Now, I'll think, what else can we improve? Before you know it, they're really changing some big things. It sounds sneaky, but it's not. When it's really more about efficiency. Now, Lean, we talked a bit about efficiency in Lean, and as a framework, it's just about doing more of the same sometimes, but a little bit better. Not necessarily doing the same. Sometimes we have to do different to get better. But it's not about how much we can do differently. It's more about how much we can do better and efficient. So, in a nutshell, we're trying to say, be lean when you want to make small changes with a perhaps uncertain team to be more efficient without necessarily reinventing everything first. So here's some conclusions. Here's me trying to draw together 4 topics worth of discussion into one slide. See how we do. Firstly, you need a solution to this question, not an answer. Do you want Scrum or Lean? Do you want fries with that? Well, no, you need a meal. You need a complete solution, not just an answer to a question. You need a complete solution to a problem. And if you need a solution to a problem, you need to solve it at all levels of the organization. So a solution is going to be one part philosophy, one part framework, and one part methodology. It's going to be a bit of each. How much of each is going to be dependent upon your situation. It's going to be dependent upon the most important element of your situation is the people. And to borrow a phrase, a somewhat famous phrase, if it's going to be a solution based around the people, it's going to be of the people, by the people, for the people. It's going to be something that they have helped create, that they are part of, that they have bought into, that they have embraced, and that they are doing, with whatever help that they've needed to do. But if the people are opposed to it, it's already dead. Whatever we decide to do, whatever decisions that the team might make in the beginning, let it change. It's going to change. What you decide and how you decide to embrace any Agile principles in the beginning may be very different in as little as a month later, and will probably be vastly different in 6 months' time. Be ready to change it every step along the way, because that is a fundamental principle of being Agile, is to be ready to change how you do it, not just what you do. That's crucial. And lastly, remember the power of the individual. We need to own it and live these ideas. Once we've gone through whatever process of change that we've gone through in order to become more agile, we need to live the ideals. We need to live the philosophy, both as individuals and as a team. So yeah, okay, the team is following a set of Agile methodologies and principles, and we've used some variation of Scrum, and as a team we're Scrumming, and it's great, and we're Agile and we're flexible, but as an individual, God, I miss my plans. There's a problem there. We need to embrace it and live it as individual people, and when people don't, that needs to be addressed. Our last quote from the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama. The ultimate authority must rest with the individual's own reason and critical analysis. Their individual authority about exactly what they do and how much value they contribute to the organization that they're a part of will be up to them. Our job in considering, embracing, and championing any change in our organization is to leverage their own individual reason and critical analysis. That needs to be at the top of our list, and if it's anywhere but the top of our list, we may be hurting our chances for success. And whatever we think, whether we think it should be Lean or Scrum, might not matter. So there we are, folks. We've run to the end of our stuff. Looking to see if there's any other questions. Let me have a look here. We'll grab any kind of questions. James, how are we going with questions overall?
Brenton, the one thing that was asked earlier that I promised we'd get to at the end is, again, about the exam.
Mm-hmm.
What do we got here? Details about what's going to be on the exam in terms of topics, and maybe sort of an example of the sort of question that there'll be.
Well, there'll be an even spread of questions from each topic. So we're going to be covering 4 topics, 10 questions each. But you'll probably note that some of the concepts and principles, there's an undercurrent, they overlap. Something that gets asked that might be referred to in topic 1 might be about something that was also talked about in topic 4, quite possibly. So it's hard for us to say that it's going to be absolutely discrete, that we're only going to ask you things in each topic. And the way in which the questions are going to be asked, I mean, there's only so many different ways you can structure a multiple choice question about this. So I'm not sure, we haven't previously provided sample questions because the questions are not considered to be that difficult that people haven't been able to get their head around it. So the wording of the questions is fairly carefully considered, and they're not meant to be pointless or tricky or deceptive in nature. They're meant to ask you for example, what do you think is the right situation here, or what is the correct answer to this? And it's going to be as was presented in the content we've given you. So no, I don't think we can give out sample questions. We haven't planned to this stage, and I don't know that we'll need to do that. So, so I can't really give you clear examples of the wording. Anyone who's you can actually, there's a way around that. Any of you who have not enrolled in the previous course, the Agile course, you could choose to enroll in that course and do the previous test if you want to. So if you're quite keen to get hold of anything that might be considered an example, you can't get a certificate for that test, obviously, because that window's shut. But you can do that test if you want to. You just got to enroll for it. So that might be a way around it. Let's see what other questions I've got here, James. I found a couple more that I'll jump into and ask. There's a question here from Terry saying, well, we use Scrum generally, but switch to Kanban if in a maintenance mode, and now are adopting Lean. Startup for generating user stories. Do you have any comments on switching methodologies like this on the same project? Well, my first question would be to ask you, how are you phrasing the concept of saying that you are switching methodologies? Are you really? If you take the purest definition of methodology and say that it's a way of doing things, and then you look at the fact that, yeah, Kanban tells you to use cards and Lean tells you to do other things, etc. Well, yes, you could say that you're switching methodologies. I wouldn't. I would say that you are growing, adapting, and evolving your existing methodology. No organization's methodology is going to accurately and absolutely align with someone else or something else or what someone else does. It might be close. It might be a starting point. I would say be absolutely comfortable with the fact that you need to do and take the bits and pieces from this. Play it down. Don't make it so dramatic. Make it say that, look, that's the whole point of being agile. We're going to use a bit of the Kanban principles in a maintenance because that works, and it does work in that sort of situation. And other things will work in other situations. So I would say don't make it as a combative obstacle issue of saying we're going to switch methodologies. Make it just a natural part of the evolution of what you do, that's how you do it. And maybe with the switch of that mindset, that would be my advice, to make that as easy as possible, but just make it the normal thing you've got to do. And then every new idea that comes out of every new methodology is just a new opportunity for you to see whether or not it might help you. And be ready to change just those little bits of what you do to take advantage of what that particular methodology offers. That would be my advice. Hopefully that's going to add to your kit bag there. So another question here, a question from Aubrey saying, is there a quick reference chart I can use to keep jogging my memory on methodology and framework? I don't know if there is one actually. I don't use one. This is all original content that we're presenting you. So this isn't paraphrased or borrowed from anywhere else. This is so. I mean, there may well be. I can't answer. Can't point you to one, unfortunately. But if anyone else feels that they have a good reference point on understanding these differences that they want to put up on the forum, please do, and Aubrey will be able to access that there. But no, there's no quick answer to these things. We're talking about definitions, very broad concepts, and you could Google a definition, of course, and come up with an idea. But the big challenge is context, right? And so what I've tried to do tonight is to nail down the context of these definitions in what we're trying to do with Agile. So I'm not sure if I can really add much to that at the moment. But I'll see if I find anything. I'll stick it up on the forums, and you can have a look there over the next few days or so.
Also, these slides will be up on the learn.itmasters site, as well as, of course, the link to tonight's recording if you need a jogging of the memory.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. That's a good point. I mean, in fact, I think these slides are already up there. So they're already there now, in fact. So that might be a useful starting point from that point of view. So Alpha's asking, is the exam at the exact same time of class 8 p.m. start? Well, it's 7 days. So yeah, the window will begin. It will first be available at the same time when the webinar would have normally become available, but it will be available for 7 whole days. So unless you want to do it in the first hour, it might not be that important. But yes, that was when it will first be available for you. Question from Giovanna is saying, how would you go about applying lean to a large project? For example, a project that has a number of teams, like 4 teams or more. The challenges you're going to face when you're trying to apply something like lean in a large project with lots of teams is you're going to have the risk that different teams will embrace and apply it at different paces and different rates. That can be a good thing. What you need to do is work out what are the danger elements of what happens if your teams are disparate in the rate of adoption. That would be step number 1. What are the risks of a disparate adoption rate between the teams? Identify those, deal with those, make sure that as much as possible those factors of change are aligned. But for the rest of it, be more flexible. Let the teams embrace their aspects of lean in the order that works for them if it's not going to disrupt the sanctity of the whole. So what I mean by this is you might have one team that loves the idea of removing waste and they're hunting for waste everywhere they look and turn, and another team is really embracing the idea of flow, and they're getting things lined up neatly and tightly in a row, and that's where their happy space is right now to get that right and make that work. And generally, if that's okay, let it be okay. Because one of the biggest problems you can possibly create with this sort of situation with a very large team is to make them all change the same way. And as I said in the beginning, there are some things that they might need to do in a coordinated fashion, but only those things. And let them know that, yes, the end goal is that all teams need to be up to speed in the same way ultimately, but there's a window for that. And that the team that's busy working on improving removing of waste is going to have to think about flow at some point as well, so don't let them forget that. So those are the sorts of things that I would suggest you think about in how you deal with a large project. Piecemeal it as and when you can, and be clear and more strict about it only when you can't be. I mean, it's a topic that you could probably go on about for some time to talk about all the ins and outs of large team issues, because all of the things we talked about with the emotional elements, the political elements, the subjectivity, the perceptions, all of that gets magnified. Obviously, the more people you have, the more people issues are going to potentially come up. But similarly, conformity plays a part. The more people you have, the more people will want to be a part of the general trend and movement. So you can allow teams to work to the strengths of their adoption of change and use that as a leveraging factor on the other teams. For example, one team is really going well with their reduction of waste, the other team's not. That can be a reason for the other team to think, oh, hang on, this other team's doing really well in these areas, we're not doing, we need to get on with that, make sure that stuff works for us as well. So the desire to be part of the progress and not part of the problem will often help people be more aligned with what's going on for the overall changes that you need to have take place to adopt lean. So again, lengthy topic, but hopefully that gives you a starting point of some things to think about that might be useful. Another question from David: can Agile be used for core system upgrades? Well, nothing in the book says you can't, but obviously you're going to have, in those sort of situations, you might have a much higher degree of pre-planning that needs to happen. So if you're talking about core systems might be things that if you can't create one in complete parallel, where if you have it in complete parallel, then obviously you can have a lot of freedom in how you go about it. But usually a core system is often far too expensive to duplicate. So a core system of an organization, you might need to be more structured in how you go about it and in what gets worked on. And in fact, things like the sequencing of activities might be more strict. The degree of flexibility, you might have more testing involved, for example. You might have more time and effort and resources dedicated to certain things. You might have longer sprints because you've really absolutely got to get things done by the end of the sprint. So there's going to be factors that are going to influence how you structure your methodology. But to say you can't do it, no, I don't think so. I would say that there's nothing about a core system that makes it inherently less likely in that description of being suitable for Agile or not. It's going to depend upon what your journey of improvement needs to be. And clearly, if you know exactly what it needs to be up front, you might be more plan-based. And if you don't and you have to make it empirical, is it empirical? Well then, yeah, core system or not, maybe it should be Agile in nature. But it's going to be its own special little version of Agile in some way, I'm sure. Other questions we got from another from Alpha. My understanding of the core system to be open and creative as well as accepting ongoing changes. But where do you draw the line to say that no more changes because it's costly to keep changing? I guess I'm going to make the assumption here that you're talking about changing a product. Although you could say it's costly to change how we do things, but usually the reasons why it's costly to change how we do it is because how we do it is often supported by infrastructure, and infrastructure costs money. So where you have infrastructure that is expensive to change and it's therefore difficult, for example, your software. If you're using software to manage a project and you want to change how you do it, you're going to have costs involved in changing and tailoring the software every time, potentially. That might mean that you choose a piece of software that is eminently more flexible and more amenable to change, for example. Or it might mean that you use more workarounds than direct solutions. But if you're talking about the change in developing of a product and your project is to create something and it's costly to change it, the real question is who bears that cost? And if it's the client who's bearing the cost and the client who's wanting the change, then you're net-net, right? It's not a case of saying, oh, look, we can't afford to wear the burden of this change. It's too costly. Well, that's got to go back to whoever is demanding or requiring the change itself. So then it comes back to a question of, is the change worth it? And if it's not, and it's change for change's sake, if it's not going to contribute to the net value outcome, then maybe it's not a change worth making, or maybe it's not a change worth making now. Maybe it's need to wait until you have a group of changes that are going to warrant the cost of investing in that change or that group of changes. Can also be applicable. So you draw the line in the value equation, and that line is drawn by whoever's paying the money. And it really will depend on what you're talking about changing, either the outcome or the method. Seems to be all the questions we've got tonight. Have we got any more? James, am I missing any? Or have we answered them all?
I think that's about it, Brenton.
Excellent. All right. Well, in that case, I do think we're at the end. I just want to summarise what to think about, everyone. You're going to still have access to the portal. Don't fret. You're going to have that access to that for a number of weeks, I believe. So it's not all going to switch off on you tomorrow. You'll have access to get into that. The test will be, we've talked about that, it'll be 1 week from now before it turns on, so you can do that at any point. If you haven't downloaded everything that you might need for the test, go ahead and download it. Make sure you've got the pre-recorded lectures, make sure you've got the recordings of the webinars. And lastly, if you've got any feedback, please give it to us. We love to hear about it when you say that, you tell us that you've grown, you've learned, you've enjoyed, you've adapted, you've gotten something out of it. Of course we love to hear that. That's our motivation. But we also want to hear you tell us where we could do things better, any disappointments, any expectations that weren't met, any good ideas that you might have encountered in other MOOCs that you can say, you should try this. This was really good for us. Anything at all. Constructive, negative, we don't mind. We just want your feedback. So we'd love to hear about that. You can use the forums, you can send an email, or I think there might even be a survey at some point. Is that correct, James? Do we send them out a survey?
That's right. We'll be sending out a survey just after the exam certificates are sent out, I think. So a bit over a week after the exam finishes, we'll be sending out a link to a survey on SurveyMonkey as well, which is anonymous. If you so choose to, you can answer it anonymously, or you can choose to do it otherwise. So we'd really like to, yeah, hear what you thought of the course and any ideas that you've got.
Okay, so roughly 2 weeks from now, you'll get an opportunity to give us your feedback, and I really want to encourage you to do that. I mean, I know it's easy. I mean, I've done that myself. I've sort of said, oh, look, you know, maybe I'll get to that, and then I don't. I guess it's the only thing we want you to do for us. Everything else you do for this course, you do for you. But the one thing we ask you to do for us is to give us your feedback. So please do when the opportunity comes up, because we like it. Until then, that's it. That's the end of it. That's it for me. This is going to be the last of the MOOCs tonight. There is going to be on the forums, you'll see some social networking links that you can go to find out when the next MOOCs are. There'll be more MOOCs next year from us. You'll be able to keep track of things on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Check those links out on the portal website. They're at the top. Subscribe to all that sort of stuff, and we'll keep you informed of the MOOCs that are coming up next year, and we hope to see you, some of you, again then. Until next time, thanks very much for joining in. Thanks for being a great bunch, and good night.